My name is Julian Rohr. And I would have told you that we were simply going through a difficult time if you had asked me that morning how stable my marriage was. There were ups and downs for every couple, right? However, by the end of that day, my 38th birthday no less, I would realize how deep the fissures were and how far someone would go to make fun of you. It began with a silky, pricey-feeling blindfold cloth. I remember the slight scent of mimosa in Clara's breath as she put it over my eyelids and whispered, "Don't peek, birthday boy." Her voice was happy. Too cheerful. Already Rhea and Tori were giggling. And it was Janelle, who had never been fond of me, who held my arm and led me clumsily out of the house. As I staggered down the stairs and into the back seat of what I thought was Claire's SUV, they insisted that I just trust us. And even at that moment, I allowed myself to think it was some sort of surprise meal. A scavenger hunt, perhaps. I chalked it up to her trying something new, even though Clara knew I detested surprises. A gesture and effort. For what seemed like hours we drove. Rural roads. No music. The mere sound of their whispers, giggles, and inside jokes, all of which I was obviously not involved in. Even if you're not the target of their laughter, there's a certain toxic edge to it that makes your stomach turn. A chorus of "you'll see," and more snickers followed my question. Where are we headed? We were no longer close to town, I could tell. The air was calmer and more solitary. The car then came to a stop. Someone unbuckled my seatbelt and pulled me out before I could speak. My shoes crunched on the gravel. A chilly wind blew into my face. Clara responded, Okay, take it off," in an excessively high voice. I squinted into the daylight after reaching up and removing the blindfold. In front of me was an abandoned gas station. The lot has been sucked up by weeds. One of the faded signs was dangling on rusty chains. Just silence and the slight sound of tires peeling away behind me. No cars, no people. I pivoted. They had vanished. The SUV had already resumed its journey. Like an afterthought, distant laughing followed. The blindfold was still hanging from my hand as I stood motionless. For a moment, I believed it to be a joke with an impending punchline. Perhaps Clara would turn around or a camera team would emerge. However, nothing arrived. Nothing but quiet. I had a dry mouth. In my chest, my heart beats rapidly. Not yet out of dread, but more out of bewilderment and incredulity. I pushed the door open just enough to see dust and darkness as I made my way toward the structure. It is full of rust and decay. I looked in my pockets. No phone, no wallet. Everything had been taken. It dawned on me then. It wasn't a simple joke. This wasn't innocuous. This was organized and carried out. A birthday wrapping paper-wrapped humiliation ritual. It's the sort of thing you can reverse. The sort of treachery that slashes silently and deeply like frostbite. I sat looking at the deserted road from a concrete block behind the station. The wind increased. In the distance, a truck went by without stopping. I wanted to shout, part of me, the stronger component, perhaps just sat motionless watching the horizon. An hour went by. Then another. There was a buzz. They must have made a mistake. I still had my old smartwatch on my wrist, not even the one Clara preferred. Fundamental features. Disabled GPS messages. However, I could ping my contacts in case of necessity. I didn't ping anyone. Rather, I launched the Uber emergency app that I had surreptitiously loaded months prior. Call it paranoia. Call it intuition. But even though I wasn't aware of it, I had been getting ready for something similar. For more than a year, Clara had been on the run. Our conversations ceased. We started having awkward phone scrolling competitions during our dinners. Every relationship turned into a transaction. Additionally, my stomach had already filed for emotional divorce, even though I continued to wear the ring. The car, a beat-up gray sedan, showed about 10 minutes later. The driver was kind and didn't ask any questions when I introduced myself as Devlin. As a precaution from the times I suspected Clara of cheating but was unable to prove it, I led him to his tiny storage unit, which was 80 meters away. There I stored a go bag. Within, using a fictitious identity, I checked into a motel with my passport, cash, backup phone, new ID, and a solitary note I'd written to myself a year before that stated, "If you're reading this, it's time." Had a lengthy shower. I didn't cry even though the water was streaming down my back. I didn't become angry. I didn't feel empty at all. I simply sensed that I was ready. I opened my offshore account, which I had covertly established with untraceable profits from previous tech contracts. To get to Miami, I reserved a private transfer. I sent a 3-word text message to a friend who is a trustworthy lawyer. Start the exit. Then, as if the universe were resetting itself, I laid back on the bed with my eyes open and watched the ceiling fan whirl slowly in circles. I boarded a yacht bound for Lisbon 2 days later. Behind us, my phone broke and fell into the sea. The man who once pleaded with his wife to join him for dinner. My name, my history. With it, that man drowned. Julian Rohr is gone. I stood at the railing wearing borrowed sunglasses, watching the coastline disappear as the wind grew stronger out on the ocean. For a minute, I reflected on Clara, her laughter, and how her friends had encouraged her. They must have felt so small that they had to make me feel even smaller. Unbeknownst to them at the time, the joke and small prank they believed would break me actually woke something else. A different me, a man they would regret ever attempting to remove, a man who didn't need to return. You most likely believe that my disappearance that day was due to anger, heartache, or perhaps pride. However, none of those things applied. Not precisely. The treachery wasn't the only thing that made me vanish. The knowledge that I had let it fester was the epiphany. That despite seeing all the warning flags, I hoped that love would transform them into something different. Someone doesn't blindside you unless you choose to ignore what's there in front of you. And I had done a lot of ignoring. Clara was cheating and I knew it. First, not in the obvious way. No hotel receipts, no lipstick smears, no odd mails phoning late at night. No, Clara wasn't that careless. Secrecy was the first step in her betrayal. Suddenly, the phone was always facing down. Excursions for girls without any pictures. Calls that stopped when I walked into a room. That wasn't my kind of laugh. And as she glanced at me, her eyes ceased to soften. Instead, they scrutinized me as if I were an issue to be resolved or a mistake she had yet to learn to let go of. One night in particular comes to mind. She believed my job was a dead end, and I had just returned home from a late shift working additional hours. They didn't hear me enter because she and Ria were on the terrace. Clara was laughing when I heard him say that he still believes I'm organizing a trip for his birthday. Wait till he sees what we have planned, God. I missed the remainder of Ria's laugh, but she mentioned something about a petrol station. The tone, that icy gloating nastiness, was what I did hear. With my keys still in my fingers, I stood motionless just inside the threshold. That evening, I had the option to leave, confront her, and demand explanations, but I chose not to. I took a different, more subdued approach. I started getting ready. I was the first to move money. I helped design the software years ago, and Clara was unaware that I still held rights to the back-end code. After our startup failed, she believed I had sold my share. She was unaware that when I used to channel money into offshore accounts, I kept the license rights under a silent partner name. It wasn't illegal. She never bothered to look at the forgotten paperwork. I already had 5 figures in a Cayman account by the time she was giggling on the patio. After that, I began recording all of her text messages and speakerphone conversations when she believed I wasn't paying attention. One evening when she was taking a shower, I took screen captures of her WhatsApp conversations with Janelle about a birthday master plan, and how they were eager to see his stupid face when he realized it wasn't a gathering. They referred to it as a reset, a strategy to force me to step outside of my comfort zone. As though deserting someone in the middle of nowhere was a retreat for well-being. I created backups, printed copies, uploaded copies to cloud accounts with names I knew only, and stored evidence on encrypted USBs. Every betrayal has a tipping point, and theirs happened on my birthday. At first, I wasn't sure what I would do with it. I wasn't considering retaliation by the time I sat on that motel bed in Key Largo with my clean identification and old duffel bag. Escape was on my mind. Complete seclusion. Moving away like a man who has been sitting in a burning building for hours and eventually gets up, rather than fleeing in terror. I didn't send a message or leave a note. I simply erased myself. I called in favors using a makeshift phone. One of them belonged to a man I assisted years ago when a hostile takeover threatened his business. With a last-minute algorithm audit, I was able to salvage his back-end security and get him out of it. I owed him. He sent a yacht. I watched local news in that dismal motel room while I waited for the trip to Miami. The headline appeared at that moment. The birthday prank that the local man missed went too far. I saw a video of Clara sobbing outside our home. Standing next to her, with her eyes downcast, Ria was obviously attempting to look regretful. However, Janelle was giving the camera a once-in-a-lifetime performance, claiming that it wasn't meant to go that far, and that she simply walked off. They assumed I was pouting. They expected me to arrive, glad to be allowed back into their life, tail between my legs. They didn't realize that as soon as they drove off, I was no longer theirs. Marcus Heller, my lawyer, who is very careful and has no tolerance for drama, contacted to make sure the transfers had been completed. Under my identity, I now controlled all of the software company's remaining shares. They had redirected the financial accounts. Using a mechanism he had developed for foreign clients wanting anonymity, my identity was legally changed. Everything was coming together more quickly than I had anticipated. It was nearly too spotless. I canceled all of the cards I had previously given to Clara via the burner phone. The following morning, she would discover that her Whole Foods automatic payments, gym membership, and Amazon Prime subscription had all bounced. I intended to leave her without any obligations, including financial ones, not because I wanted to harm her. I got a suit that didn't look like anything I had ever worn, but I shaved my hair. Julian was no longer there when I looked in the mirror. I saw someone who was sharper, leaner, and no longer needed to be understood. I stood at the edge of the deck that night and threw the phone into the water as the boat drew away from the Miami shore. There was no splash. It simply disappeared. At sea, the stars shone brighter. The wind is colder. I knew it wasn't her, but I wasn't sure what I was floating toward. They would remember for the rest of their lives what they believed to be a joke, the type of cruelty you laugh about while drinking. Because I was already halfway gone when they were making fun of me in that SUV, assuming I had run after them like a lost dog. The best thing is that they were unaware that the man they had left behind wasn't simply leaving. Erasing them was his task. I watched myself disappear from the dusty little motel in Kirgo. I recall staring at the ancient ceiling fan as it spawned while I was lying on the groaning bed with the spring rigid beneath my back. Every revolution seemed to be a countdown to the precise unknown, either independence or the disintegration of my previous identity. Julian Rohr, the man who felt that devotion meant sticking by someone even when it hurt, who smiled through silence, and who forgave when he should have walked. Like a shaky light bulb, that version of myself was going out. With subtitles scuttling at the bottom of the screen, I had the news on mute. Seeing my own absence be treated like a minor topic on a slow day was weird. The banner said, "A local man is missing after a birthday surprise goes wrong." I detested the fuzzy picture of myself that appeared. Clara had shared it 2 years prior with the description, "My sleepy bear." At the time it appeared cute, and my eyes were half closed. It appeared to be a joke now, one in which I had unknowingly participated. They were presenting it as an unintentional desertion or a misunderstanding. Clara's face was blotchy but dry as she stood on our front lawn and spoke to a reporter while crying. She lied to our neighbors about why we didn't attend their housewarming celebration, and her tone was the same. Performative, remorseful, and soft. It was meant to be enjoyable, a recollection. We didn't think he would really go. Clara, you never expected me to go. That was the issue. You assumed that I would constantly remain and put up with the rudeness. Be the guy who took the hits and never stopped grinning. However, silent men are sensitive to everything. We simply don't display it. And we truly mean it when we say we're done. Flipping across the networks, I sought out additional coverage. A psychologist was invited by one local station to discuss the effect of public pranks on the mental health of adults. A still image of the petrol station where I had been dumped was displayed, complete with cracked pavement, a broken pump, and wild grass growing up the sign as if the environment had given up on the location. They had abandoned me there. Like garbage. My tablet still had my Uber receipt open. The fare back to civilization was $87.56. To escape the mess they had created, it only cost that. In the meantime, my plans were in motion in the shadows. I was already on the yacht leaving Miami when the reports were clarified. I wasn't simply vanishing. I was going through a transition. There is a distinction. When someone vanishes, they leave behind holes. Silent transitioners leave no trace behind as they occupy new places, names, and pathways. And I didn't intend to go back. I completed the last of my preparations using the satellite link. Marcus, my lawyer, attested to it. My silent shares of the tech company had been liquidated. On paper, I was no longer a partner. They had cleaned me. The money was now untraceable in Unlin, and it was safe in a variety of accounts of Europe and Asia. Clara was unaware that I still owned stock in that business. I was always perceived by her as the unsuccessful programmer who never really recovered from the startup failure. I allowed her to believe that role. In contrast, I had earned more money in 5 years from licensing royalties than she would have from yoga retreats and personal brand coaching over the course of a lifetime. I wasn't wealthy. I was free, silent, and liquid. The Azores was the first place the yacht stopped. I stayed on the ship. As the heat pressed against my shoulders and the salt pricked my flesh, I gazed out across the islands from the deck. This was the most unusual way for me to travel. Just momentum and a direction. No itineraries or expectations. There were no queries from the crew. They were professional and discreet. I introduced myself as Daniel Cross. I could verify it with the documentation. After months of digital preparation, a new identity and passport were created. It was about being, not simply about running. My years were enough for her. I also refused to allow her to use my name. We left the Azores and made our way to Lisbon. I used my business visa to reserve a long-term stay at a service department. The shadows weren't where I was hiding. I was taking my time coming into the light. Lisbon was indifferent to my identity. I was greeted by the city's stone streets, hot croissants, and discussions in a language I didn't understand. I did nothing for the first few days. I took a stroll. I observed. I paid attention. I sat with a notebook in cafes and jotted down things I couldn't remember how to say. I want to be by myself yet not lonely. Or it wasn't the departure that caused pain. It was the ease with which they watched me leave. I opened my laptop a week later. As previously, my fingers lingered over the keys. I began working as a freelancer under aliases, offering cybersecurity advice to investment startups and boutique organizations, while I was still developing back-end systems for smart homes and adaptive networks. There are plenty of foreigners in Portugal who require discreet assistance with discrete issues. After holding it in for too long, it felt nice, like breathing again. I received enough customers by the end of the second month to lease a studio space close to the harbor. It's just mine, nothing impressive. I only had a workstation, a server rack, a couch, and a kettle as furnishings. On most days, I left the windows open to allow the breeze to break the stillness. I first met Luciana at that office on a soggy Tuesday. She didn't want to find me. Not at all. She had requested a reference when she arrived. She was informed by another specialist that I discreetly resolved issues. She exuded confidence like silk and was cool, collected, and inquisitive. She informed me that her father was an old money, cautious, and weary investor. Her goal was to update their portfolio by adding green infrastructure and digital assets. I told her very little about myself. I didn't have to. Performance was all that interested her, not the past. Prior to talking and laughing, we worked together. I couldn't remember how that felt. Genuine giggling. Not the derisive kind that comes from those who find humor in suffering. The sort that makes you realize you're still alive and surprises you. I kept Clara, the petrol station, and the birthday from Luciana. Maybe never, but not then. I no longer claimed that portion of my experience as mine. I had destroyed the house in metaphor. The ashes didn't need to be shown to her. I created something fresh instead. Veritas Analytics, which means truth in Latin, is the name I gave to my new consulting business. The remark wasn't directed at Clara. I made a self-promise. I stopped thinking what they were doing back home by the end of the third month. The news coverage no longer mattered to me. I didn't look through my previous social media profiles. As I recalled who I was, I let the world to forget me. Julian Rohr was no longer there. It was Daniel Cross. And I didn't feel the need to explain either man to anyone for the first time in a long time. No questions are asked in Europe. Not the type I was accustomed to, however. Judgmental questions or ones concealed by worried smiles. People in Lisbon don't give a damn. If you want to talk, they will. If you don't, they abandon you. Someone shedding the skin of a life gone wrong for a man like me. It was flawless. In every aspect, I became Daniel Cross. The more I said the new name, the easier it came off my tongue. It matched my passport, my business cards. Luciana even assisted me in opening a bank account for our new company. The sensation of flinching when someone called out a name, I no longer answered to eventually faded from my memory. Now Julian Rohr was but a phantom. My studio by the harbor became more than just a place to work when I left that gas station on Route 19. It turned into a haven. Through open windows the sea breeze flowed, and on nights, the faint echo of father music from neighboring cafes filled the air. At first I worked alone, typing late into the night to create security frameworks for customers who wired euros paid with Bitcoin, and occasionally just trusted me. All I needed was silence and a purpose. Everything was altered by Luciana. Even if you tried to avoid her presence, it was impossible. Intelligent without ever being ostentatious. Straightforward but never impolite. She wore gray and navy-colored clothing. And because of the assurance in her voice, rather than her volume, people paid attention when she talked. She was more than simply an investor's kid. The investor was now her. Quietly, her father had retired. She moved where others made noise. She requested that we get together again, this time for supper, after we had already met a few times. Strategic, she had said. I refrained from arguing. I enjoyed her company. She didn't delve into my history, didn't inquire as to why I never shared on social media or why I preferred cash. Luciana was all about results, and I provided her with just that. She suggested a collaboration while dining on grilled octopus and vinho verde. I'd like to construct something agile. Daniel is a company that finds broken items and makes them useful. Real value, not just numbers. Tech, land, power, and transit. The brain is in you. I have the resources and connections. Let's construct it. She said it in such a casual way, as though we were talking about plans for the weekend. I gave a nod. What would you like to name it? I nearly laughed when she remarked, Equita is Latin. It means balance. Fairness. After taking a taste of her wine, equilibrium, equity. For years I have been denied certain things. The irony, however, was satisfying, like taking back something. Within a week, we registered Equita's holdings. Portugal threw wide its arms to businesses, particularly those with money and spotless histories. And I possessed both. Daniel Cross appeared to be an American digital strategist with 10 years of experience working as a freelancer. No red flags and clean taxes. The man who once filed joint taxes with a woman who referred to him as too quiet to be fascinating is not mentioned. We began modestly, with a cargo ship embroiled in legal proceedings off the coast of Marseilles, a bankrupt warehouse in Seville, and an outdated solar panel company that was unable to identify its digital footprint. The technical due diligence was my responsibility. Like a lioness in high heels, Luciana negotiated. We multiplied, not simply survived. By the end of the first year, we had a green energy app in beta, 2 shipping routes redirected profitably, and 5 properties undergoing renovation. Press was never something we did on purpose. Luciana's rule was that, be modest in public but large in numbers. I liked it. I had had enough of being observed by those who merely used my appearance to gauge my shortcomings. We were now creating something that, even from a distance, no one could find funny. We moved into a tiny but gorgeous building in Porto somewhere during the second year. Our new headquarters were on the 3rd floor. Warm wood floors, black steel beams, and exposed brick. Money didn't shout from it. Efficiency was whispered. Luciana and I worked that way. No gaudy logos, only results. Equita's had no website at all. Through recommendations and word of mouth, clients arrived. We didn't call it that at the time, but we were more than just business partners. There were just 2 persons who trusted one another enough to allow stillness to exist between them without feeling burdened. There was no proposal or cannula confessions. She didn't inquire about my scars. I didn't inquire about hers. Our beat was that. After sealing a deal with a fading textile company one night on a Florence rooftop, she leaned toward me and whispered, I don't care what you did before we met, but whatever it was, I'm glad you survived it. I thought about that statement for weeks. She was happy I was alive. Just survived. Not fixed nor explained. Julian Rohr, meanwhile, was still unaccounted for in the United States. I occasionally checked the secret inbox. I used to keep an eye on old accounts. It was primarily spam and trash mail, but sometimes I would get a ping from an old buddy or worse from Clara. On the screen, her name would illuminate like a small landmine. Please know that I didn't intend for this to go this far, Julian. Or come home, please. I was wrong. All of us did. And my favorite. You didn't say anything to me. It was unkind, cruel. I had been blindfolded and standing in front of a rotting gas pump when they had laughed. Like I was the punchline in a joke they drew for their own entertainment. They drove away. She now demanded explanations and apologies. I didn't remove them, but I also didn't respond. I allowed them to remain there like museum objects. To remember, not to relive. The emails served as a reminder of what I had left behind, and the reasons I should never return. After 3 years of this new life, things changed once more. On the deck of our yacht, Luciana and I were candidly photographed by a journalist working on a piece on sustainable investing companies in Southern Europe. The picture with me wearing sunglasses and Luciana next to me in white, laughing in midair, was intended to be background fluff, but it ended up making the rounds in the business section of a minor international outlet. It wasn't until a week later that I gave it any thought. Her name appeared once more as I accessed that private mailbox. Subject: Claire, I noticed you. Is that you in the message? Are you still here? I don't get it. I thought you were gone forever when you left me. Say something, please. I wasn't afraid, but the past had found me. Give them a look. He was no longer hiding, and the man they believed they had buried was still here. Although it didn't happen right away, once it got going I was unable to stop it. An agreement led to another. Before long, Luciana and I were doing more than just investing. We were revitalizing long-dead industries and rewriting failing legacies. It wasn't noisy in Ikita's holdings. It was not ostentatious. Although it was never our style, it was real and expanding. Luciana has a knack for identifying underappreciated worth. Old names with buried patents, neglected properties with hidden zoning potential, and businesses on the fringe. I had the ability to access their systems and examine the hazards and actual figures hidden behind the glitzy pitch slides. I was the one who subtly reorganized their infrastructure, cleaned up their mess, and led them to believe that it had all been their idea in the first place, while she sat at long tables drinking espresso with guys twice her age, luring them into signing over their empires. We traveled quickly, silently, and like smoke across Europe. Croatia, Austria, and Italy. Not much has our names on it. It was everything under silent partnerships, trusts, and holding corporations. We played every angle with surgical precision, registered assets across continents, and worked through proxies. I once agreed with Luciana when she said, "If they can find your name, you did it wrong." However, I also buried the past a little deeper with each triumph. Clara's husband Julian Rohr was the target of a nasty birthday joke. The quiet man who loved too much and laughed too gently at the dinner table. There was no place for such men in the world we were creating. He was now only a memory that I kept to myself. I wouldn't breathe for a ghost. For more than a year, I had not uttered Clara's name. I hadn't had to. Until the day we signed the biggest contract of our lives, her shadow stopped following me. 3 Eastern European distressed logistics chains were involved in the multi-phase acquisition agreement. The sort of thing that, with the appropriate management, might grow into a billion-dollar pipeline. At a property in Majorca, we hosted the last round of negotiations. Every detail, including who showed up when, what they saw, and who they shook hands with, was meticulously prepared. I was dressed in the identical navy suit that I had made in Rome. I continued to wear simple cufflinks, subtle just like me. During the signing, Luciana stood beside me, beaming with silent pride. "Daniel, you created this backbone." I simply applied the skin. I grinned but remained silent. I had discovered that silence might speak louder than words. Later that evening, we sipped wine while standing on the villa's balcony. Over the sea, the fading sun was turning everything it came into contact with gold. I was halted when Luciana turned to face me and asked, "Do you ever miss it? Your old life?" She had never asked such a question before, and I never imagined hearing her use the term miss in connection with a history we had never discussed. I said softly, "I don't miss it. I recall it." She nodded, but remembering doesn't equal wanting it back. That's reasonable. What kind of pain causes a man to start over so thoroughly has always baffled me. I wanted to tell her everything right then and there as I gazed at her. The gas station, the blindfold, the laughter, and how I had waited for love to change but knew it would never. However, I refrained from doing so since I didn't want her to feel sorry for me. I wanted her to view me not as the horrible man I had been at the hands of others, but as the person I was now. Instead, I gave her a kiss and we allowed the subject to stray. I received a ping on an old server account the following morning while looking at analytics in my Porto office. I had placed some digital traps in case it came up. An alarm system that looked for picture similarities in public databases was linked to a backdoor. It was the same picture from the Monaco document that set it off. Luciana and I, glowing and at ease, grinning effortlessly. It had circulated once more after being picked up by a mid-tier business site that told us about Europe's quiet might. The facial recognition had done its work, so I might have been recognized by someone else, but my name was still listed as Daniel Cross, co-founder of Akitas. After not using the burner inbox for months, I signed in. They were there. Fresh messages. Janelle had previously claimed that I was too emotionally reliant to be a true man, as had Clara and Ria. Clara's initial communication was brief. Is that you? An hour later, the second one arrived. I'm positive it's you, Julian, even though I didn't recognize you at first. I'm at a loss for words. The tone shifted after the third communication. You left me behind. You walked away silently. I looked for you. I shed tears for you. You have no idea what I endured. Yes, it was there. Moving from remorse to blame. I read everything, but I didn't respond. Ria's communication was more succinct. Clara's losing her mind. She keeps playing back all of the events. I just wanted to shake things up, she explains. It didn't go as far as she intended. It wasn't intended to go this far. For hours, that line kept repeating in my mind. They laughed about it, plotted it, and planned it. And suddenly I was something they couldn't understand, having emerged from the ruins of their joke. They desired forgiveness. They would not receive it. After shutting off my inbox, I took a stroll. The streets were packed with late lunchers and artists painting on the corners, and the air was warm. I noticed my reflection in the window of a bookshop as I passed it. I had a different appearance. I had changed not just physically. Stronger build, more confident stance, and a sharper jawline, but there was more to it than that. A silent strength in the gaze. A man who was no longer in need of approval. I didn't give it another look as I passed. Luciana and I celebrated that evening. Another transaction was completed. Another month of advancement. I kept the emails a secret from her. They didn't matter, not because I was concealing them. They were echoes. Ghosts. The remains of an extinguished fire. However, even ghosts tend to appear when you least expect them to. 2 weeks later, a U.S. business looking for seed money sent a legal query to our firm. The business is called Renovation Services by Reynolds Plus Company. Clara Reynolds, the CEO. She had branded her new business using my last name. Calling the fire department to the ashes of a house you set on fire was like that. I received the request through Luciana. Perplexed. This one caught my attention. What does the name represent to you? I spent a lot of time looking at the screen. It was crucial. It signaled that the past had finally arrived. And I would be the one choosing whether or not to respond this time. On my laptop, Luciana's email was open. Because it was ironic, the subject line is innocent. Clara Reynolds is a possible lead. Time folded in on itself as soon as I saw it. Her name in bold. It hit something. A gradual pain. It's the kind that reminds you that you're still recovering. Not the kind that hurts. As though seeing would somehow make it go away, I gazed at the screen for longer than I should have. It didn't. Reynolds Clara. She continued to use my last name. Not in the past. Not with honor. As a company. I leaned back in my chair and quietly let out a breath at that point. I believed that I had left without resentment. However, there was something about her that caused a burn I hadn't experienced in years. The way she took my name and stuck it on a business pitch deck, as if we were still connected. Luciana didn't say much. A small refurbishment company in the US is looking for funding in Europe. The CEO appears youthful, ambitious, and rather desperate. I thought we could have a peek, but you decide. The name was recognizable. Known. That's one way to describe it. I browsed the attachment. With its flowery language, ambiguous measures, and emotive appeals about reconstructing lives via spaces, the pitch was predictable. Clara had always spoken well, particularly in front of others. A simple spreadsheet, a few pictures of little remodeling projects, and a link to a movie. Even though I shouldn't have, I clicked. She was there. She is 3 years older, has darker, longer hair, and a softer yet incisive voice. At Reynolds Plus Company, we think that individuals are the first to need restoration. Not all we do is fix houses. We change the meaning of homes. I hope. Tenacity.
Honor.
I hope. Tenacity.
Honor.
I clenched my jaw and pressed pause. I no longer had to listen. On Thursday, the board meeting for incoming pitches was planned. I didn't usually go to the first round. Luciana took care of those. She possessed the ability to softly shatter dreams without causing any harm. I told her, however, that I would want to sit in this time. She arched an eyebrow. Are you certain? I gave a nod. Just in case, I want to gauge their leadership style. She didn't ask more questions. That was one of Luciana's qualities that I really valued. What I didn't offer was never questioned by her. On Thursday, I wore a modest yet tidy outfit. I wore a dark gray shirt without a tie, with my beard cropped sharply and the cuffs rolled once. When I glanced in the mirror, I saw Daniel Cross, a man in charge and co-founder of Akitas Holdings, rather than Julian, the husband and the abandoned man at the gas station. Like all pitch sessions, it started off this way. The first 3 startups were little, some promising, some ridiculous. Reynolds Plus Company followed. Clara and 2 co-workers I didn't recognize came into the room. At first, she didn't notice me. She had Luciana in her sights. With a cheerful, little over-practiced smile, she started her introduction. Greetings for the afternoon. At Reynolds Plus Company, I am the founder and chief coordinator. My name is Clara Reynolds. We appreciate you having us today. Then she noticed me by turning to her left. There was a hiccup in the rhythm, a blink, and everything in her face wavered. She seemed to forget what words were as her mouth opened as if she were going to speak. I remained motionless. I didn't grin. Luciana saw.